I'm really excited to introduce our speaker today, Sherri Minick, that's going to talk to us on this little Messerschmitt car here. Sherri has been with the museum since we opened up. She's our volunteer coordinator, and a lot of you know Sherri. She's around a lot, and a lot of times at the front desk, helps with the cars and coffee, and just so many events here at the museum. This is an awesome job. Well, last fall, a group of us went to Indiana to a car auction, and one of the cars that was available at the auction was a little Messerschmitt. And Sherri said, I don't care what you guys bring back, but don't come home if you don't bring the Messerschmitt. So I had to bring the Messerschmitt back with us. So anyway, this is a cute little car, and Sherri said that she'd really like to do a presentation on that, so I said, have at it. So Sherri, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll hear all about this great little car.
Thank you. So as Deb said, I have been here at the museum for 2 years and stuff, but my interest in cars kind of goes clear back a few years. So I am the daughter of a body man, so we've had cars of quite the variety in my life for forever. So, and then I married a man who was very interested in cars as well, and he has introduced me to even more. So it's in my blood now, so I kind of have to do these things. I'm a weird and quirky person, so I love weird and quirky cars. So yeah, I know that's a shock to everybody, but yeah. So, but especially micro cars. That's just one of my things that's just an area that I love. So I'm determined to eventually have a whole micro car section of the museum, and it'll be named after me and everything. So, without further ado, we're going to talk here about our Messerschmitt. Alright, so as the video said, the history of Messerschmitt began with, not automobiles, but airplanes. They were a German share ownership aircraft manufacturing corporation, and they were named after their chief designer, Willy Messerschmitt. They started in about 1938, and then they were known primarily for their World War II fighter aircrafts, particularly the BF-109 and the NE-262. The company did survive after the war, undergoing a number of mergers and changing its name to eventually being bought out by Deutsche Aerospace, which is now part of Airbus. So, kind of a fun little fact. Willy Messerschmitt joined the company in 1927 as their chief designer and engineer, and he formed a design team. Their first design was the Messerschmitt M20, and it was a near catastrophe because most of them actually crashed. So that is a picture of one of those. It was a single-engine, high-wing monoplane, and it seated 10 passengers. During the war, Messerschmitt became a major design supplier. Their BF-109 and BF-110 formed the vast majority of their fighter strength for the first half of the war. However, for the second half of the war, Messerschmitt turned to almost all jet-powered designs, and they were the world's producer of the very first jet engine. And they made the NE-262 SWAL. Messerschmitt relied heavily on slave labor. They used inmates from Spain, Italy, Poland, Slovenia, France, Russia, Hungarian, and they were all inmates. So, cheap way to produce a bunch of planes. For 10 years after the war, they were not allowed to produce aircrafts. So they focused primarily on starting to build prefab housing. But in 1952, Fritz Fend approached the company to build a car. It was a three-wheeled motorcycle bubble car called the cabin scooter. Fend had been an employee of Messerschmitt during the war. He had moved on to take over the company business, but he still was always interested in building an actual car. His first cars that he made were invalid carriages. He made these for people who had mobility issues. The first concept was a pedal-powered tricycle. It had single front wheels that were steered by the handlebars and powered by a mechanism actuated by pushing back and forth on the handlebars. In 1948, Fenn bought a power-assisted bicycle to use to power his Flitzler, as they were called. The tricycle had a front wheel that was steered by the handlebars. I already said that, that's a repeat. Shortly afterwards, he was offered a 38cc Victoria two-stroke engine, normally used for motorizing bicycles. All of the tests were successful, and the vehicle reached around 25 miles per hour, but it still had lots of problems with suspension and steering. The Flitzlers were made from around September of 1948 into about the year 1950. Around 250 units were produced, but they were really expensive, and so production did not maintain. And that's a picture of those. They kind of look like little space capsules, really. So, very funky. The cabin roller platform was used for 4 microcars. They had 3 three-wheeled ones. They had the KR-175, the KR-200, and the KR-201. And then they also produced a 4-wheeled Tiger, is what it was called. This is a picture of the 175. Kind of the differences on it is it had a 175cc single-cylinder 2-stroke engine, and it had a pull start, but then later on it was offered as an option with an electric start. The wheelbase was 2.029 meters, the length was 2.8, the width was 1.22, the height was 1.2, curb weight was around 220 kilograms. They sold around 15,000 units of this. And a big difference on this is it had 8-inch wheels versus the 200 that has the 9-inch wheels. The Tiger, the 4-wheeled vehicle, had a 494cc 2-cylinder engine, so much, much bigger. Only about 320 of these were made. This is one reason why they're extremely hard to find and they're worth quite a bit of money. They had one at the auction. What did you say it brought, Doug? I forgot. Wasn't there a Tiger that you said it was like 200 and some?
No, 148.
148, so quite a bit more expensive. So.
This one's about 7.
Yeah. The controls on the Tiger were very similar to those on the 200, except the Tiger's single starting mode for the engine, and very much like a normal car. So this is different, where you have to literally shut it off and push in the ignition and then start it, and then it goes in reverse backwards. So, but on the Tiger, you didn't have to do that. The other difference was the tachometer was offered as a replacement for the clock. So, production for the 200 began in around 1953, and in 1955, U.S. distribution was given to Frankston's Motor Corporation of Glendale, California. This is where most of them were actually distributed. Built from 1955 to 65 in around 30,200 some odd units. So the KR200 is one of the most iconic bubble cars ever made. So in total, there was about 45,000 Messerschmitts out there. So I kind of doubt there's that many left right now. Messerschmitt disappeared in around 1968 following a merger. And as the video said, and as I said earlier, they are now part of Airbus. The frame. The cabin roller is based on a central monocoque tub from pressed steel sheets and tubular steel. The tub tapers upward from the front to the rear with a bulkhead at the back. The bulkhead supports a tubular steel subframe and acts as the firewall. The subframe supports the engine and the rear suspension, and the engine cover is hinged to the monocoque structure. The fuel tank is at the top of the engine cover and feeds the carburetor by gravity. So, just a little in most cars. The bubble canopy, entry to the KR's models was through a canopy door. As it said on the video, everything is attached. You've got the whole canopy, the windshield, all of that's on that same cover. So on sports roadster models, the canopy was fixed and there was no top or windows at all. It was only a tonneau cover. The bubble top on the KR200 was simplified over that of the KR175 by use of a larger curved glass windshield that formed A-pillars with the side window frames. This allowed the bubble to be similar but more compact to the KR175 bubble, and it was consequently easier and less expensive to produce. I tell you what, it's extremely hot because there's not much ventilation in that. So. The bubble is plexiglass and it has a frame set of sliding windows on either side of the canopy and a glass windshield. So the only glass on it is the actual windshield. The windshield wiper was manual on the 175, but it's electric on the 200. So that's another big difference. Suspension. The front suspension of the KR200 was by a transverse lower arm sprung by a Torsano 3-element rubber spring at the inside end. The 175 had a different arrangement with rubber cones. The front suspension travel was limited by rubber bumpers. The rear suspension was by a trailing arm similar to that of a single-sided motorcycle swing arm, which also formed the enclosure for the chain drive to the rear wheel. The trailing arm was suspended by another Torsano rubber spring, and hydraulic dampers were added to the design with the introduction of the KR200 in around 1955, and it also had the front track was increased at that time. Steering. Steering is really, really simple. It's connected directly to the track rods controlling the front wheels, resulting in approximately a 1/3 turn from the left extreme to the right extreme, so it's a lock-to-lock, if some of you guys know what the lock-to-lock is. The tandem seating, the narrow body and the corresponding low frontal area was achieved with the tandem seating, and this allowed the body to taper like an aircraft fuselage with a practical length. So very, very much going back to their aircraft days. The tandem seating also centralized the mass of the car along with the longitudinal axis, which when combined with the low center of gravity, the low weight, the wheel placement, and all at the vehicle's extremes gave the 200 good handling characteristics. I still, when we drove it, all of these things talk about the steering and the control and all this, but I would not want to take this very fast around curves. I don't think so. Yeah. One of the more minor advantages of the tandem seating was that it made an export version to countries. So when they did that, they didn't have to worry about that with this kind of tandem seating. So there's no right or left. So an export model was built, but this was really denoted with more luxurious trim level. So it was more about the exterior and the way it looked. They made it look prettier. The engine. The 200 runs on a 191cc. It's a Fichtel and Sox forced air cooled single-cylinder two-stroke engine, and is positioned in the front of the rear wheel just behind the passenger seat, which will open all this up and you can see that. The engine has 2 sets of contact breaker points. To reverse, the engine was stopped and then restarted going backwards, and this was affected by pushing the key in further into the ignition switch than normal. And it goes 4 speeds backwards, just the way it goes forward or frontwards, and it, yeah. So we only did it in first gear going backwards. We didn't do the 4. So, the transmission is a 4-manual motorcycle type. It's a sequential positive stop transmission, providing the car with the same 4-gear ratios as it forward as it does in backwards. It's a 9.9 horsepower propelled. And it got up to around 65 miles per hour. I think top speeds that we did today was not even half of that. So. The plain fuel consumption of the car was around 87 miles per gallon. So very efficient little car. One of the fun facts, the Fichtel and Sox engine, Ernest Sox was the one who created the back pedal brake on all bicycles. So that's where that history of that. Yeah. The controls. Unlike the 175, the 200 had a full set of pedals. It had a clutch, brake, and accelerator. The brake pedal still operates mechanical brakes using cable. Very, very simple. There's not a lot to it. These are some fun little facts about the 200. Wheelbase is 202.9. The length is 281.9. The width is 121.9. The height is 119.9, and the curb weight is only about 230 kilograms. Original price was around $1,070. Combined miles per gallon average was around 60. The original colors were red, gray, and ivory, but then later on they added all the extras. So these right here were all the exterior colors offered, these were the interiors, and then later on they did some metallic colors too. So. Although it's a no-frills vehicle, very simplistic, it did offer the export package that I talked about. It's the two-tone paint job, as you see there in that one that's the teal color. They painted the hubcaps, and then on the interior they added things like a heater, a clock, and a sunshade. So very luxurious. Gotta have that sunshade. Our Messerschmitt was formerly owned by the Bruce Weiner Microcar Museum in Madison, Georgia. Bruce was an executive double level, and he started collecting microcars. That was just a hobby that he did. His museum closed in 2013, and all of the cars were auctioned off. Mr. Najib Khan bought our car and several others from the auction from the museum. But he has since been accused of some fraudulent conduct to about the tune of $122 million. So his collection was auctioned off, luckily for us, in Elkhart in 2019, and we purchased the car then, right? 2009, I think that's what we figured. So the value of our Messerschmitt we talked about is around $65,000 to $75,000. So, oh, 2020, sorry. Okay, so it was supposed to happen in 2019, and then it got postponed. We all know why. So that's it. That's the story of our Messerschmitt.